All right, folks, it is time for the weekly overview, and indeed we can argue that it was time for the weekly overview 2 days ago. I've got the window open. It's a warm day in Los Angeles, and sorry, I'm just looking. I'm a little lopsided. I'm not going to fix this, so you're just going to have to watch this video in a slightly lopsided manner. And quite frankly, that word lopsided applies to the month of June, does it not? As this is a weekly overview, and I'm going to look at the primary transits for the remainder of the week. Aspects, for those of you who prefer that word, which is more accurate. I agree. But I think there are two things that we need to keep in mind at present. One is that, as I have been telling you pretty much since March, April, when we look at this current batch of forward movement months, May, June, July, where the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, are all direct, and we were coming off of the eclipses and the Mercury retrograde in April, and these are 3 months of us moving forward in a particular direction of our choosing, but also based very much on which doors and opportunities are open, remain open, beckon to us, appeal to us, and also what it is that necessity, in a certain sense, and a certain type of stress and the closed doors aspect of things is also driving us towards. Now, I know this sounds very broad if this is the first of my videos that you're seeing, but if you, and I'm not saying this so that it encourages you to watch previous videos, but all astrology videos are in the middle of something. So we've been developing, those of us who've been part of this community for a while, have been developing this theme for a while. And I think what is important for all of, as a down-to-earth basic reminder, so I'm not repeating everything that I've said over the past 6 months, the thing to remember to note is that May, June, and July are forward movement months. I have given different analogies. I have likened May to getting onto the diving board and moving forward, and June being the month where we jump off of it. The new moon in Gemini in June, on June the 6th, I think, the title of that video was Commitment, and I think that that still applies. It's a question of committing to a particular path, even when that commitment is really an act of faith to some extent, an act of faith and an act of necessity. An act of faith, this background thing is going to keep happening, so don't let it distract you. If it really something, it's well secured, but the breeze is nice. Now, if something starts to happen and there's a lot of ambient noise, I'll close the window and you can watch me sweat. But I'm going to try and avoid that for as long as I can. The idea of commitment until July the 5th, we are in the June 6th Gemini new moon month. It's a matter of committing to, as I said, the path that both appeals to us and where we feel the opportunities are. It could be linked to a direction that we wanted to move towards, feel inspired to move towards, that was outlined by the Aries and Taurus parts of our chart, the houses occupied by the signs of Aries and Taurus in our chart. It could be, for those of you who don't know that, it could be a direction that you may have outlined or articulated to yourself in May, June, July, August of 2023, that then from September and especially the middle of October to March of this year, the lunar eclipse in Aries on March the 24th, you may have felt somehow stopped from doing so. February of this year, 2024, may have seen a bit of a breakthrough, and we entered, I am giving you this summary now because it's so hard to not consider the summary. We entered mid-March to the end of April, the eclipses in Mercury retrograde, perhaps a little confused or puzzled about which way do I go, what do I commit to? And that time certainly outlined for us as we entered May, where the doors were open, where the doors were closed or closing, where the opportunities were. We may have found to our surprise that they were still aligned with whatever that direction was that we articulated to ourselves in May, June, July, August of last year, related to the Aries North Node eclipses and some really important and expansive transits in the sign of Taurus. And we entered May May had a flow to it. June, as I've been mentioning to you all along, is a month of squares where the planets, at the very least, the planets that are moving through the sign of Gemini, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the new moon itself in Gemini, was squaring Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. And of course, Mars, as it transited from Aries to Taurus, squared Pluto in Aquarius. Now, Venus and Mercury, as of a day or so ago, even today, are moving into the sign of Cancer. Venus and Mercury, sorry if I said Mars, I was wrong. Venus and Mercury moved from Gemini to the sign of Cancer, or in the process of doing so. It's Monday, Tuesday of this week, the 17th and 18th of this week. In addition, wouldn't surprise me at all, 16th, 17th, 18th. Hold on, I've got it right here. What am I doing? Venus entered the sign of Cancer on the 16th. Mercury entered the sign of Cancer yesterday, the 17th, and Venus and Mercury conjuncted in the sign of Cancer. Just before Venus and Mercury entered the sign of Cancer, while they were still in Gemini in the very last degree, they squared Neptune and Pisces. So the bulk of the squares that we have concerned ourselves with are starting to get behind us. The Sun, Venus, Mercury have squared Saturn. Mars by now has squared Pluto. Venus and Mercury have squared Neptune. But that doesn't mean that as we enter this particular week, we are feeling particularly at peace or unedgy. Probably a better way of saying it, we're likely to have entered this week feeling pretty edgy. Now, the first 2 weeks of June did have the blessing of resonating with eclipsy occurrences. For some people, they may have received offers, an increase in visibility, an almost eclipsy growth, career-wise, romantically, whatever it is. For other people, it may have been a subtle and unmistakable push or direction or feeling like, you know what, this is the direction I need to move and this is the direction I need to commit to. By the time we got past the 14th, and also, as I mentioned in last week's weekly overview, as we dealt with the Mars squaring Pluto on the 11th, was it? Yes, it was the 11th of June, about a week ago. Certainly as we entered last Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, even till yesterday, we may have found ourselves, and indeed, the last week's weekly overview was titled around being extraordinarily busy. You know, Mars, the planet of action, requiring action in the Taurus part of our chart to allow or help Pluto continue the transformation in the Aquarius and Capricorn parts of the chart that it is currently transiting. The very last degree of Capricorn, the very first degree or two of Aquarius, which is where Pluto is currently transiting. We may well have found that today, the 18th, Tuesday, is sort of the first day when we find ourselves spit out at the end of these consecutive squares. As we look ahead at this week, the following aspects apply. On the 20th, Thursday, the Sun squares Neptune, and the Sun enters the sign of Cancer. So we've got one more of these squares left. Then on the 21st, we have the full moon in Capricorn, and that full moon in Capricorn is square Neptune. The Sun squares Neptune, enters the sign of Cancer. We have the full moon in Capricorn. In that very first degree of Capricorn, we have 2 full moons in Capricorn this year. And the full moon, for all intents and purposes, on the way to becoming full, squares Neptune in Pisces. So if we look ahead at the week to the end of this week, the square to Neptune, the squares to Neptune, the squares to Saturn and Neptune remain an important, and for some people potentially still a disturbing influence. As we head towards the full moon, remember with full moons there can be culminations, there can be offers, there can be departures, there can be endings, there can be visibility, there can be illumination. Well, I'll just say visibility. It's a better word than, because it has a positive context. But on the more challenging side, there can be fears and anxieties and emotional intensity. Certainly over the next 4 days or so, we're likely to find ourselves continuing the busy streak. I don't think it's going to be quite as, when I did the weekly overview last week, I talked about last week being somewhat full moony in its intensity. And full moons for me are often, unless you're experiencing a full moon in your 4th house or your 12th house, it's very likely that a full moon, typically the 48 hours before, the 24 to 48 hours after a full moon, 3 or 4 days surrounding a full moon, are busy times, are active times, maybe even slightly chaotic times. As I've said to you a number of times, it's the week after the full moon that feels comfortably productive, the most productive week out of the 4 that constitutes the month that a new moon creates. On the 22nd, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So Tuesday is the 18th. Wednesday, no aspects. Thursday, the 20th, the Sun squares Neptune, and then it enters the sign of Cancer. The 21st, Friday, full moon in Capricorn. The 22nd, Saturday, Mercury in the sign of Cancer squares the nodes, the North Node and the South Node. And that's it for the week. As we enter next week, Venus squares the nodes. And Mercury trines Saturn. And that happens on the 26th of June. As the planets transit the signs, let me try that again, shall I? As the planets transit the sign of Cancer, they're going to square the nodes, they're going to trine Saturn, they're going to square Chiron, they're going to trine Neptune. From my perspective, that is a much more comfortable set of aspects than what we have been experiencing in what is commonly called Gemini season. As the planets went through the sign of Gemini, they trined the South Node, but they squared Saturn and Neptune. And those squares, including the Mars-Pluto square, they are much edgier. Much edgier. We're waiting. May flow. June requiring commitment and action. And with the squares, the action is generated by discomfort, by need, by a feeling of necessity. Not a comfortable month. July, and especially as we head towards the second full moon in Capricorn, around the 21st, 22nd of July. July is much easier. And it kind of has this element of culmination. Now, some people would say the second full moon in Capricorn is not that comfortable considering the fact that it conjuncts Pluto. I'm not. I would much rather see Plutonian transformation as a byproduct of everything that we either should have been doing in June and have either not been able to, or are feeling pressure to do, or feeling pressure to catch up on, or as a result of everything that we have achieved in June. I'm going to expand on this, so just bear with me. I am not a fan of, sort of 60-minute videos, but there's, insofar, I think that this is one of those weeks where we need, some context. The first thing that we need to talk about in this particular weekly overview we're talking about now, which is the squares. The second thing I need to talk to you about, the fact is that Mercury and Venus both were combust till pretty recently, and still arguably are, and still are combust. Mercury is starting to move forward. Both Mercury and Venus very recently conjuncted the Sun. Understandably, they were in forward direct motion, but they're still conjunct the Sun. And again, it's only today that I can say that we might be feeling like we're kind of, spit out the end of a kind of intensity over the past 10, 12 days since that new moon in Gemini. I would much rather take squares to Chiron and the node, but trines to Saturn and Neptune, than I would take squares to Saturn and Neptune and Mars squaring Pluto. Remember, all the slower moving transformational planets are in consecutive signs. Pluto's in Aquarius, Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, the nodes, the North Node, to be precise, and Chiron in Aries, Uranus in Taurus, Jupiter now in Gemini. And for a while, the first part of this year likely had a much more dynamic feel because of what I called conjunction season. All the personal planets, as they made their way through the sign of Capricorn, conjuncted Pluto, or conjuncted Pluto in Aquarius, because on January 20th, the Sun and Pluto walked into Aquarius hand in hand. And then, of course, conjuncted Saturn and Neptune, and either Chiron or the North Node, or the North Node or Chiron, and then Jupiter, Uranus, or Uranus, Jupiter, depending on which planet made it to which longer distance planet first. But now that the personal planets are separating, they're going to first square, then trine, then oppose, then trine, then square all these, and then conjunct these longer term planets. The first of the oppositions, of course, is going to be when the planets are reaching the end of the sign of Cancer, they're going to oppose Pluto. And indeed, the second full moon in Capricorn, July 20th, 21st, 22nd, the Sun is getting ready to oppose Pluto. And by that time, both Venus and Mercury will have opposed Pluto. I would much rather take, as I've said, the two trines that are going to... The intensity shifts next week as we make it past this particular full moon on Friday, the first full moon in Capricorn. And Mercury becomes the first of the planets to trine Saturn on the 26th. It's really that new moon in Cancer that's going to trine Saturn that will, on July the 5th, that is going to usher in. If we look at May, June, and July as 3 months of forward movement, think of May as moving to the edge of the diving board. Think of June as the month where we need to jump off the diving board or we're going to feel really edgy and angsty and uncomfortable. And think of July as the month where you can, I was going to say, come out of the pool and get your score if you think competitively. But let's think of it this way. Let's think of it as going at the edge of the diving board, diving off, and then swimming to the other side. And let's think of July as swimming to that other side. And as I've mentioned to you, August definitely and necessarily is a month of pausing. The only exception is if you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart, August may find you that much more decisive. The rest of us really need August to recalibrate, with Mercury retrograde and the new moon in Leo occurring on the day that Mercury is stationary, the day before Mercury goes retrograde. Keeping all this in mind, what do squares do? Squares are, from my perspective, the most dynamic aspects requiring action. And as I've told you, the solution to a square quite simply is identifying the faster moving planet and understanding that the faster moving planet needs to take some sort of action to allow the slower moving planet to transform the part of the chart that it is currently transiting. So this is meant that as the Sun, Venus, Mercury, indeed the new moon, which has this particular square encoded into it on June the 6th, squared Saturn in Pisces, actions related to sort of the archetypal principles embodied by these planets, Venus, Mercury, the Sun, the new moon signifying action, needed to be taken in the sign of Gemini, the house occupied by the sign of Gemini in your birth chart, to help Saturn stabilize and teach us what we need to learn about the karmic consequences of our actions or inactions, but also to help stabilize some of the chaos or help construct plans in the sign of Pisces, in the house occupied by the sign of Pisces in our chart, if we have any intentions of pursuing a spiritual goal or an artistic goal in that part of the chart. Saturn can help concretize plans that are ambitious and that Saturn deems challenging enough and raises the bar high enough to say, achieve this. Let's make a plan to move forward and achieve this. As these planets get ready to square Neptune, the squares to Neptune are a little bit more uncomfortable if you are dealing with and have been dealing with fogginess and deception in the Pisces part of the chart, the house occupied by Pisces, loss. The squares from Gemini are a little bit more constructive if you're pursuing an artistic or spiritual path in the sign, in the house occupied by the sign of Pisces in your chart. Again, action needed in the sign of Gemini. So far, communication, relationship building, following up on financial opportunities in the Gemini part of the chart. It's so interesting. Glendale is just one city away from the heart of Los Angeles, but it is quiet enough that you hear sirens, you know, even at a distance. Anyway, action needed in the Gemini part of the chart in order to either honor moving towards a spiritual or artistic direction in the Pisces part of the chart, or to manage loss and deception. Oh my God. Manage loss and deception in the Pisces part of the chart, the house occupied by Pisces in your chart. Mars coming into Taurus requiring action to allow Pluto to do its transformation in the Aquarius part of the chart. Today is the first day when the bulk of these squares are behind us. We are left with the Sun squaring Neptune on Thursday and the full moon squaring Neptune on Friday. Seriously, those cars and those cops better be after something. It continues to be a week of unrest. It continues to be a week of ants in our pants. It continues to be a week where we feel the pressure and the necessity to commit. This here, 25 minutes into this video, is the heart of this video, what I'm about to say right now. What is the direction that you're trying to move towards? And understand that this movement may have been articulated April, May, June of 2023, but will not be completed till May, June of 2025. It's a big change, potentially. It's a big change symbolized by the North Node in Aries, the Aries part of your chart, the house occupied by Aries, how you're supposed to move towards it, what you're supposed to learn from it, the sense of adventure. Always with the North Node in the eclipses, you do need to just be really clear about what your financial and emotional security goals are, so that you don't just, blow it all to the wind in the pursuit of something that feels right and feels exciting. It will be right. There's something to pursue at the end of that, but that you are in the middle of a process and a transformation. You are in the middle of May, June, and July. You are in the middle of a Mercury cycle and a Venus cycle. I use the Venus cycle term loosely, but accurately for all intents and purposes, for the purpose of this video. We're in the middle of things. We no longer have the momentum of moving towards the edge of the diving board that we had in May. We have no choice but to take action, and in some cases to accelerate action. When I use the word commitment to define the new moon in Gemini, the month of June the 6th to July the 5th, it was a commitment to the direction we want to move towards, signified not only by the direction we may have been wanting to move towards since April, May, June, July 2023, but also very likely April of 2024 may have given us a sense of doors opening and closing, and it would not, as I said, surprise me if the open doors were related to that direction and other doors closed. There's also a commitment to taking action to avoid crises where necessity and the eclipses are forcing us to take action to create something new. Losing a job, a financial crisis, stress of any kind, shortages, closing of doors, closing of taps, metaphorically speaking, that are forcing us to take action, grab a hold of the sails of our ship, and move to smoother waters by taking action in the right directions. Needing to look for a job, needing to accelerate income from directions that seem to have growth because other sources of income have dried up, needing to consider which relationship doors need to be closed, which relationship doors need to be explored or opened or strengthened or solidified. A lot of emphasis on the closing of doors relationship-wise, though. All of that is also in play. And then finally, commitment to stabilizing the Pisces part of the chart, where Saturn and Neptune are transiting. If there has been loss and deception and gaslighting, or if there's a desire to move in a spiritual or artistic direction. The last 2 weeks with the square after square after square after square after square. And indeed, as we headed towards the 11th of June, and pretty much till yesterday, may have made juggling things challenging, partly because Mars's entry into Taurus and squaring Pluto would have pulled all the energy into the Taurus part of the chart. So that while these squares were happening in Gemini to Saturn and Neptune, we may have been really stretched time-wise to think, where do I put my attention? It doesn't matter what planet is transiting where. And it doesn't matter if Mars is the only planet transiting a certain part of the chart. Wherever Mars is, the bulk of your energy is going to go. And Mars-Pluto aspects are intense aspects. I actually think that they are, in terms of intensity of change, they're the most intense aspect of all in the way that they tend to be experienced, in the potential that they hold. The other thing outside the squares that I said that we need to cover in this video is the fact that on the 4th of June, the Sun conjuncted Venus. Now, I did a video on the Sun conjuncting Venus as a kind of throwaway, but I can't tell you how many people resonated with that video. So I'm going to place a link to that video at the end of this, once I've done processing it, so that you can take a look at it if that makes sense to you, and if you need to. On the 14th, 10 days after that, on the 14th, 4 days ago, the Sun conjuncted Mercury. And indeed, when I did my weekly overview last week, I talked about the fact that that put us in the middle of the Mercury cycle in Aries that started up when Mercury retrograde conjuncted the Sun in the sign of Aries in April. When Venus and Mercury are combust, it doesn't matter if they're direct or retrograde. Certainly when Mercury's combust, a lot of people said that the last week and a half has felt a little bit like a Mercury retrograde. That's what it feels like. When Mercury is dark, when Mercury is obliterated by the brightness of the sun, it technically loses a certain amount of its power. In the same way that when Mercury is retrograde, things go awry. Also, with planets conjuncting the sun, and particularly personal planets conjuncting the sun, the moon, Venus, Mercury, there's an energetic pull down, darkness, depression, slow down. The planets may be moving fast, and they are, but by virtue of the fact that they are blinded by the sun and in conversation with the sun, and in the middle of their respective cycles, there's a certain amount of processing that is occurring. With Venus, the 2 cycles related to Venus that we are in the middle of, an 8-year cycle from 2020 to 2028. And in order to understand that 8-year cycle, in that Sun conjunct Venus video, I asked you to think about 2012 to 2020, 2004 to 2012, something along those lines. And of course, the fact that we're in a kind of midpoint between 2 Venus retrogrades, one that occurred in last 23 July, August, and one that is going to come up in March and April of 2025. Relationships, finances, financial opportunities, to some extent creative opportunities, beautification, Venusian activities. What is ended? What is beginning? What do I need to grow? Who's in? Who's out? And with Mercury being combust, understanding and marking that a certain phase of communication growth and kind of a baseline foundation has been laid related to the Aries part of the chart where the North Node eclipse occurred on April the 8th. It's the eclipse cycle that we are under currently. And understanding that since the 14th of June into August, we are now, based on the foundation that's been laid, going to be building on that. We are going, as we head into July, we're going into the stage of flowering. It's a more expansive, but we need these planets to get further and further away from the sun. Also, with Venus and Mercury, it may mean that there have been financial slowdowns with Venus being combust. This may continue for the rest of this week. When we look at the full moon on Friday, it is still opposite Venus, which means that Venus is, it's really by this weekend that I think Venus is going to at least start to clear some of its combustness. So relationship-wise, financially, we may still be carrying a certain amount of heaviness, a slowness in terms of flow. Houses that are ruled by Mercury and Venus may have been, over the past 2 or 3 weeks, 2 weeks especially, been experiencing a slowdown. In the middle of it all, we have all these planets squaring each other, demanding action. Our energy has got to have been all over the map. Indeed, as I said, the day I'm doing this video, Tuesday, as I looked at just how far the planets were starting to, Mercury and Venus especially, was starting to get to the sun, might be the day when you feel like, okay, rather than being at the mercy of the squares and the planets, and particularly Mars square Pluto, let me start to take some action. Let me get back on the horse to take the actions that I actually want to take, where I don't feel like I'm being pushed around energetically by highly energetic and active and busy transits, aspects like Mars squaring Pluto, and aspects that are putting pressure on me to act, like the Sun and Venus and Mercury and the current new moon cycle that we're in squaring Saturn and Neptune, but at the same time having Mercury and Venus combust. So then you have to kind of deal with the fact that even if I'm searching for the energy, some of the energy is not there. There's an exhaustion in meeting the demands. There's a frustration that certain demands are not being met. And there's a feeling that a certain amount of momentum and energy is not available to us. That shifts and changes today, but the rest of the week is still overshadowed by the sun getting ready to square Neptune and the full moon squaring Neptune and opposing Venus Thursday and Friday of this week. Now, as we head past the weekend and as we head towards the 26th, absolutely. Venus squaring the nodes and Mercury trining Saturn puts us in a more expansive space. Also, in fairness, on the 22nd, Mercury squaring the nodes puts us in an expansive space as well, related to the eclipses, related to the North Node and the South Node. During this week, in the middle of dealing with this Neptune square, with the sun and the full moon, it may be a mix of expansiveness and a feeling like action needs to be taken with regard to communication, even opportunity, related to leaning into the Aries part of the chart, the part of the chart where we are desiring to move towards, and releasing in the Libra part of the chart. The sun squaring Neptune the day before the full moon, we may be acutely aware as the week goes on of what we have been able to do and not been able to do to help Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. And we may find that we have time this week and especially next week, but I would say this week headed towards the full moon to finally take certain actions that otherwise we would have loved to take, related to Venus, Mercury, the new moon in Gemini, assisting Saturn in Pisces in helping either stabilize that part of the chart if we're dealing with loss, deception, gaslighting, or we're dealing with Saturn actually helping us make some plans in a creative spiritual direction. I know there's an intensity to this video, but it's an intense time. Being at the midpoint of various cycles, being at the midpoint, the excitement and momentum of getting past April and getting past the eclipses and getting past Mercury retrograde was enough of a push through May. May, I am walking on the diving board. I'm moving forward. We're taking action. And then June, and it's just like, oh my God, what shall I focus? Like, what fresh? And all of a sudden in June, we were also made to face the heaviest part of the chart right now, which is the Pisces part of the chart. And made to contend with what is real and what is not real, what is foggy and what is not foggy. Is there deception? Is there not deception? Part of the problem with Neptune is that things are never quite as bad as they seem, but they're also not clear. So you kind of have to forgive yourself and everyone to some extent for the fact that everyone is kind of dealing with phantoms as they try and make some sense of things that are going on. But with Saturn's presence since last March, as I've said in the Pisces part of the chart, Saturn is making clear what is real and what is not real. Neptune just has a tendency to put everything in this slightly paranoid smoke and mirrors state. Because nothing is clear and no one's being completely clear and no one's communicating clearly. In May, when we were largely dealing with planets transiting the sign of Taurus, we did not have to deal with, we could let the Pisces part of our chart be. In June, not only has the Mars squaring Pluto placed a certain amount of pressure on us to take action on the Taurus part of the chart. Dynamic, hopefully, exciting, hopefully, but busy, pressing, urgent. Not only have the first 2 weeks in June brought eclipsy occurrences for some people, obviously, in terms of visibility and career growth and personal growth and relationship issues, but also for others in subtle but unmistakable form. But then with the Gemini new moon and with the squares to Saturn, Neptune, Pisces, we've also been going flap, 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 flap against the Pisces part of the chart. As the planets get ready, well, now it's not a question of getting ready, as the planets transit through the sign of Cancer, and indeed, we get to potentially start to experience a certain amount of ease. But some of that ease with the trines to Saturn and some of what we get to reap and what we get to harvest may still be dependent on actions we take this week as the sun gets ready to square Neptune and we have a full moon squaring Neptune. So we may be on the 18th of June at a point where we are not reacting so much to busyness that is imposed on us, but we are getting busier as we head to the full moon, maybe even now imposing a certain amount of pressure on us to get certain things done, and continuing to remain in a place of productivity for the week after the full moon, next week, in order to catch up on tasks related to committing to the path and direction we want to move forward towards and accelerating that change based on what we know. Moving forward in the direction of the north node in the eclipses is an act of faith. And there's no way to know whatever that desired goal or destination is, whether it will actually amount to something concrete by next May or not. But it provides something that is necessary for us to incorporate in the leaning forward towards which we get to build muscles, go through doors that we would not have otherwise. The eclipses and the nodes, as I like to say, promise more than they deliver, but that does not mean. And they kind of have this kind of hunger and this hero's journey quality to them, which is why I always say, keep a sharp eye on what your financial and emotional security needs are. But that doesn't mean that you aren't called in that direction and that you should follow its calling, because that is where the growth is. That's where the learning is. That's where you get to keep incorporating things on which you can continue to build. So committing in that direction, committing to finishing up activities related to the Gemini part of your chart, perhaps, but activities Mercury related, communication related, Venus related, finances and relationship related. And with the Sun getting closer and closer to squaring Neptune by Friday and the full moon, it's almost an internal, what is it that I need to do to help stabilize the Pisces part of the chart this week? This is the big question this week. That is going to make me feel comfortable, and that is going to make me feel settled, and that is going to make me feel more secure. And how can I do it in a way that establishes boundaries or moves me further towards structuring appropriately ambitious artistic or spiritual goals, but in a way that is still cordial? As I said, we're no longer under the influence of the Mars-Pluto square. Mars is going to, as it continues to move through the sign of Taurus, conjunct Uranus. But we'll get to that. And that conjunction is a conjunction of opportunity. It's exciting. It's not a square of pressure. The squares of pressure now are going to be felt squaring the nodes and squaring Chiron. But this week, especially as we head towards the full moon, the number one priority for this week, and as I said, it's going to come from you now. It's not going to come from, when I did last week's weekly overview, I talked about the fact that the to-do list was exploding and tasks were mushrooming, and it was really around all these squares gathering momentum, but especially the Mars-Pluto square, which admittedly occurred in the beginning part of last week on the 11th of June, I think. But by the 11th, 12th of June had added so much on our plates that I wouldn't be surprised that it was about yesterday, today, that we actually were just like, okay, done with that Mars-Pluto square and everything it put on my plate. Now that Mercury and Venus are clearing the Sun, and we are starting to get some of our agency back with regard to our communication, cognitive abilities, and now that the relationship and financial planet is starting to clear, now that both Mercury and Venus are starting to shake hands with the Sun and say, thank you for the conversation, thank you for the alignment conference that we have just had during the first 2 weeks of June. Sun, solar completely conscious self. Thank you for the stamp of approval in giving us our task list for the next phase of our flowering portion of our, in Mercury's case, Mercury's Aries cycle. In Venus's case, moving forward from the Sun now till the next Venus retrograde. Both Venus and Mercury ahead of the Sun, building on whatever was started for Venus between August of 2023 to June of this year, for Mercury between April of 2024 and June 14th of this year. But as these planets clear, we get to have our agency, our energy back, so that rather than being at the mercy of other people's to-do lists and opportunities, we now get to exercise greater agency and start to catch up on, very likely, pending tasks related to stabilizing the Pisces part of the chart as this week goes on. In summary, Sun squares Neptune and enters the sign of Cancer on the 20th. full moon on the 21st. On the 22nd, Mercury squares the nodes, the planet of communication, communication needed, transactions, communication, in the Cancer portion of the chart in such a way that it allows us to move forward in the Aries part of the chart and release what we need to release in the Libra part of the chart, a process that started on April 19th of 2023 and continues till the end of the first week of June 2025. Then if we're really looking ahead at a week properly and we look towards the 26th, which is next Tuesday, Venus squares the nodes. So relationships, opportunities, actually something concrete potentially showing up, financial opportunity, actions needing to be taken related to the eclipses, but also Mercury trines Saturn. We may start to receive or engage in communications that truly are now stabilizing, reaping rewards. But that reaping of rewards by next Tuesday is not going to happen if we don't finish up what we need to finish up this week with regard to the actions we feel we need to take to stabilize the Pisces part of the chart. That's really what's pending. And what is going to create the unrest is the fact that it's a square and that it involves the sun. Because the sun and the moon, with the full moon involved, as I said, is our most, it just illuminates, it's a highly intuitive week. Highly intuitive, highly unsettled, irrational to some extent. And I mean that insofar as it is not really, the Mercury will be used in the service of. Mercury is not really managing the show. There's no messing with the knowing of the sun. It is the brightest planet. And as it gets ready to square Neptune, as the sun and Neptune stop at the stop sign, which the sun is going to be moving on first, and there's a full moon with the moon involved too. So we're going to have the sun, Neptune, the full moon. The moon's going to go first, Capricorn, the sun's going to go next, Neptune is going to continue on its path. But there's an intuitive, and of course, by the time we get to, the next full moon a month from now, we're going to be in a different place. The sun is going to be trining Neptune by that time, and opposing Pluto. 2.5 more weeks of unrest. It's really the July 5th new moon that changes the energy. But and hear me on this, 2.5 weeks to move towards making your dreams come true. There are no aspects that are as productive as squares. The very transformation or the stabilization that is offered by the longer, or the opportunity that is offered by the longer moving planets, the slower moving planets, the more transformational planets, Pluto, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, the nodes, Chiron. That transformation itself is dependent on what it is that we need to do in the various parts of the chart where the personal planets are going to stabilize them. I know I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again, but if I can exhort you to start to take back your energy now that Mercury and Venus are clearing the sun, get a sense of what you need to do to commit. Again, that word comes up. Which direction are you moving in? What do you need to do because of necessity and crisis and chaos and stress in order to stabilize your life? What do you need to do to stabilize the Pisces part of the chart, the house occupied by Pisces? This week, you are taking actions primarily to stabilize the Pisces part of the chart, although things may come up that you have to honor and take care of that are related to the eclipses. By next week, you start to reap some of the rewards, hopefully. Or there's greater ease, there's greater harmony if you're having to take actions and steps towards stabilizing the Pisces part of the chart. By the time you get to the trines, Mercury, as next week goes on, Venus, ultimately the Sun, with that new moon on July the 5th. That is very, a new moon trine Saturn. Wow, that is a foundation. That is a long-term commitment to a foundation and stability being built from the Cancer side of the chart, but towards that Pisces part of the chart. The energy will shift. It will become easier and smoother, but take the actions you need to take, that you know you need to take, that may have been really hard to manage over the past couple of weeks. Partly because Mars took over with its square to Pluto, partly because our own energy was not quite completely available to us with Mercury and Venus both being combust, and us being in this midpoint, us being necessarily a little bit in a place of reflection. We didn't just have one personal planet meeting up with the sun while the other one was free to do its thing. We had two of them consecutively. And not only did they meet up with the sun, but then yesterday they both met up with each other, Mercury and Venus in the sign of Cancer. So there has been a lot of internal, where am I at? Where do I need to put my commitment? What has been building since the Aries part of the chart? What has been going on for me from a relationship and a financial and creative perspective? You may be tired of a bit of the narrative that has been part of your life since last July, but especially since April now. And you may be getting ready to say, you know what? Time to move forward and time to make things happen in a different way. Time to put some energy behind them. This week may very well be more towards stabilizing the Pisces part of the chart. But till July the 5th, even though the bulk of the squares that are really agitating will be done by the end of this week, they will be. The full moon will be done, the sun will be done. Yes, Mars is following slowly, and at some point Mars will square Saturn and will square Neptune. Ugh. And will square, we'll deal with that. It's not for a while. Saturn and Neptune are not done with Pisces just yet. You can probably feel the urgency, but you can also probably feel the energetic return of your being able to get back on the horse and start to exercise some control or the direction in which you can take things. And I suggest you take them, especially for the next 2 weeks while you still have energy. The last week before the July the 5th, the moon is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. We'll have less and less energy. So we've got to have that to contend with. If you found this video useful, feel free to tell your friends about it. If you are interested, I have like everything that I say at the end of the video is like trying to come out at once. If you would like me to take a look at your own birth chart or give you a reading or create a version of a birth chart for you that's easy to read so you can follow along with my videos more easily, you're welcome to use the email address in the description box and email me for rates and information, and I can let you know. If you are a viewer whose email address is like Sations, S-A-T-I-O-N-S, please know that I have responded to everybody. I have responded to your emails. They may be going to junk folders. Every now and then I'll get someone who says, hey, I didn't get a response from you. And I'm like, I responded the same day and I'm responding again. Here's the information again. But if it keeps going to a junk folder, you're not going to see it. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already. If you are watching these from Facebook or Twitter, please subscribe to my YouTube channel because I want to be done posting these videos on social media. Next to the subscribe button, bell icon, hover over it, wiggly bell on top, click on it, and you'll be notified when I do new videos. I know this is a long video, but I wanted to sympathize. I wanted to acknowledge that the energies, as I've been maintaining that the energies of June, it's easier to walk on a diving board to the very edge. It's harder to take that jump. But that's what June is about. More to follow. Take care.